Hello, everyone. Welcome to another sociology lecture. I am Dr. Dilsora Fozilova. Today is Saturday. I am in a more casual environment than usual. So you might hear my neighbor's dog barking or the cars going by, and you have to take it as part of a natural setting or natural social process. So we are going to talk about social conditions under total control this week. And within this topic, we will be discussing the origins of totalitarianism, a very thick book written by American scholar, political theorist, Hannah Arendt. So the first question is then, why Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism is very important to understand fear and social anxieties in society. Studying Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism is crucial for understanding fear and social anxieties in both historical and contemporary contexts. Arendt's analysis of totalitarianism offers a profound insight into how fear is manufactured, manipulated, and weaponized to create conditions of control, isolation, and terror in society. Before I share my PowerPoint, I would like to discuss a little bit about the main points she makes in her book. So one of the main points she makes or arguments she has is using fear as a tool to maintain totalitarian control in society. Arendt illustrates how totalitarian regimes or totalitarian leaders use fear as a central mechanism to maintain power and suppress dissent. Fear is instilled through propaganda, surveillance, and state violence, creating an environment where individuals are constantly anxious about their social life and safety. By studying this, you're going to explore how fear and social anxiety is created in society and maintained by these totalitarian leaders for the purpose of keeping their power for themselves. So they want to keep this power, but they don't find any other way but keeping this totalitarian control to maintain that power. They use another argument, Hannah Arendt uses, they use a propaganda in shaping this fear and anxieties. Totalitarian regimes rely on the propaganda to spread misinformation and create false narratives in society. These narratives often tap into existing social anxieties such as fear of the other or economic instability and amplify them to justify the need for authoritarian control. For example, when the United States of America starting war in terror, for example, shows society how terror is so important to take care of. Like, you have to do something about it. It is exaggerated. It is trying to create fear in society. And then everything done by the government is probably justified to create safety for the people, just as similar to Hannah Arendt's arguments here. And also, Arendt argues that totalitarian regimes thrive on isolating individuals from one another and breaking down the social bonds. So if there is any kind of bond exists in society, there's chance of people coming together or social solidarity is possible. So that might increase the resistance of people towards the totalitarian control. Therefore, totalitarian leaders does not favor people's unification or solidarity in society. In modern contexts, studying this can help us how social fragmentation and disconnection contributes to collective anxiety and make individuals more vulnerable to authoritarian or totalitarian ideologies or extremist movements. Also, creating the other, whoever the other is, that is maybe terrorist, maybe extremist, maybe mafia, or whatever the other is, creating that fear towards the other is used for political purposes. A core aspect of Hannah Arendt's work is her discussion of how totalitarian regimes create an enemy or the other to unite the populace through fear. This process of scapegoating and exclusion is tied to the creation of racial, ethnic, ideological, or political enemies, driving social anxieties around identity, security, and belonging. And we can even see in today's world that this kind of situations happen in regards to immigration, racial discrimination, and the rise of populist movements. Also in Hannah Arendt's book, Hannah Arendt describes how totalitarianism strips individuals of a stable shared identity, replacing it with constantly shifting narratives. This loss of certainty and truth fuels social anxieties as people become unsure of what is real and what is not real. So creating all these kind of false narratives makes them anxious and not trusting the information around them. Or there is such a disinformation, spread of disinformation in society, and that can erode trust in institutions and create widespread social anxieties. Also, Arendt talks about the psychology of conformity and complicity. If you remember some of the studies, probably you have connection with the Milgram studies, the experiment, or there was another one, the Stanford prison experiment. That was kind of like trying to understand why people conform or why people do the things their authorities say, even though they do know that doing that is a wrong thing. For example, bringing Jewish people to kill them is a wrong thing, but Nazi officers kept doing that for such a long time, and they were aware of what was happening to these people. And Hannah Arendt is also questioning this process of why people do that. What is the psychology of conformity? Arendt's exploration of totalitarianism includes the examination of how fear leads to conformity and complicity in the face of atrocity. When people are afraid of punishment or any kind of something bad happening to them, they are more likely to conform to harmful norms and ideologies, even if they privately or in their heart they disagree with what's happening. Understanding this dynamic helps us to explain how fear operates within society, leading to widespread anxiety and passive acceptance of oppressive structures. And also, Hannah Arendt's book is very important discussing state-sanctioned violence that creates anxieties about the survival of people in society. Totalitarian regimes often use state-sanctioned violence as a means of controlling the population. They intend to foster environment where the fear of physical harm or death dominates the everyday life. So people are scared of losing their livelihoods or being punished. Therefore, they keep doing this thing is what's expected from them. This heightens existential anxieties and makes individuals more susceptible to coercion. So there are so many different the arguments Hannah Arendt in this book, and I believe that this is one of the most powerful books written about totalitarian control, which is very relevant in our time. Studying Hannah Arendt is very essential, understanding how similar dynamics of fear and anxiety may emerge in our time in contemporary political environments through political movements that exhibit authoritarian tendencies. Today, when we are going through this elections with Trump and Harris, we can see all different kind of situations. We watched Trump being president, although thank God nothing very bad happened. There was moving towards again authoritarian or dictatorial regime in one of the most democracies or strongest democracies in the world. And when I say that, I really mean that that all different kinds of democracies exist, and then we view Canada, United States, and some of the European countries being stronger than some of the other countries to offering democratic standards in society. So this is the main arguments given by Hannah Arendt that probably overviewing this helps you to understand the book better. When I was thinking about how to explain this book, I thought I'll give you the first arguments, a little bit, the taste of arguments first before I share my PowerPoint and go through with you all these different parts in the origins of totalitarianism. Let me share my PowerPoint and go from here. So welcome back. Social conditions under total control, this week's topic. And today we're going to discuss briefly about Hannah Arendt, who she is and her main works. And then we will overview the historical and political context in the post Second World War, rise of Nazism and Stalinism, the structure of the book, and the focus on anti-Semitism, imperialism, and totalitarianism. So who is Hannah Arendt? Hannah Arendt is a Jewish American scholar who was born in a secular family in Germany in 1906. She was enrolled at the University of Marburg, and she met philosopher Martin Heidegger there. Knowing Martin Heidegger becomes very important later for Hannah Arendt's life more than one way. However, what we are interested is one of her books is written about the main person in the book is Martin Heidegger. because of his involvement with Nazi party and lecturing in Nazi party. Hannah Arendt completed her PhD in 1929 at the University of Heidelberg under the philosopher, psychologist Karl Jasper, one of the known names. In 1930s, Arendt was deeply troubled by Heidegger's involvement in National Socialist meetings of Nazi. In 1933, Hannah Arendt leaves Germany, and she's stateless for some time, and she writes about statelessness in her books as well. And there's 8 years between 1933 and 1941. 1941, she immigrated to the United States of America and settled in New York. So she was involved in journalism first, and she was working at the New York Times, and then she died in 1975. She taught at the universities. I just brought up very brief background of Hannah Arendt here. However, her major works, she has done tremendous amount of amazing work. One of the books, I read many of them. One of the books I was highly touched by was The Origins of Totalitarianism, that was published for the first time in 1951. And the rest of her books, it feels to me that she wrote this Origins of Totalitarianism, and then she broke the parts and expanded on them all other of her work. The human condition, for example, she talks about how can we be in a state of mind that she's talking about conformity and how you can live with yourself, how you can do the right thing. So she expands that in the human condition. And she writes about revolution. And another book by her is Eichmann in Jerusalem, A Report on the Banality of Evil. When she was doing work in the New York Times, she covered this trial where one of the officers of Nazi Germany, Adolf Eichmann, was brought to the trial in Jerusalem. He actually ran away, and then they found it after a few years of him running away, living in Austria, I believe, or Australia. And then Hannah Arendt, goes to write a report on them. And then later on, after writing so many pieces, she brings them together as a book. And then Men in the Dark Times, that's the book about Heidegger being involved in the Nazi political party. And she's basically discussing when it's dark times, how intelligent people are reacting to it, or where they stand in their understanding of that times. For her, this is very troubling because she says, if you don't understand the situation and if you speak, you can do wrong. And then if you understand the situation, or she says, if you don't understand an act is wrong, and then if you understand everything what's going on and don't act, don't say nothing, it's also wrong. She's just kind of addressing some of the intellectuals in her time, saying like, you knew what was going on. You knew there was very troubling atrocities happening in Europe at that time, but you did not say anything. You did not do anything about that. And then another book is 1970 on violence. Her last book is published after she died. That's called The Life of the Mind. So this is the book. This is the main page of The Origins of Totalitarianism. The Origins of Totalitarianism divided into 3 parts. The first part is anti-Semitism, where she writes about the development of racism and anti-Jewish discrimination in society before this all happened, where that was coming from, Anti-Semitism has nothing to do with Jewish. She puts that kind of argument. She says anti-Semitism existed, but it didn't have nothing to do with what happened to Jewish people. Jewish people were innocent. They did not do anything wrong to create this ideology. Nationalism, social and political anti-Semitism, she talks about that as well. In the second part, I think second part, imperialism, is the longest and most interesting part of the origins of totalitarianism. And she writes about the political expansionist climate in Europe at the time, and that imperialism / globalism, what was happening, why imperialism is very important for the formation of totalitarianism in the world. And the last part is totalitarianism. She talks about the pan-national movements, that German nationalist movement, for example, how totalitarianism works in practice. So she's just basically saying, we know how totalitarianism works in theory, but how it works in practice. And she talks about hyper-nationalism or supranationalism, use of science for the political purposes. For example, we talk about scientific racism, right? Scientific atheism, all of those scientific stuff, how they used for political purposes. And she talks about the formation of classes into the masses: homelessness, rooflessness, and purposelessness. So let's get into one by one and explore the topic a little bit deeper. So the first part is anti-Semitism. Before I do that, I forgot I had this slide here. The burden of our time, the origins of totalitarianism. I wanted to say that why all of a sudden totalitarianism raised in Europe was one of the puzzling things for Hannah Arendt. She says totalitarianism is a novel form of government. It never existed before, never ever existed, and never ever existed since. So that means this Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia has some things in common, but it is kind of distinct from all other authoritarian or dictatorial systems in the world. So novel form of government is Hannah Arendt's first argument. She says, never existed after that. However, she says, the elements of totalitarianism existed in all kinds of rulings. It's feudalism or capitalism or socialism, or any kind of governments may have the elements of totalitarianism. But to be 100% totalitarian government, that it has to have certain elements, and that's what she is discussing in The Origins of Totalitarianism. She differentiates between all authoritarian governments in the world and these two totalitarian governments. So here I think that Origins of Totalitarianism is a misleading a little bit. The title is misleading. It's not about the origins of totalitarianism, but the cause of totalitarianism, more about the cause of totalitarianism. However, there are not particular causes to it. It's just kind of like when I say that out loud, it seems like, what is your logic here? So it is about the causes of totalitarianism. There are so many causes, but there is not particular cause for totalitarian regime. And take it the way you want to take it. Interesting comment. So let's start with anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism and the breakdown of the nation state. So to start with, I pose some statements and questions in the beginning. I will use some of them to create your weekly quizzes or tests or exams, whatever you call them. So why does Hannah Arendt begin her analysis with anti-Semitism and imperialism? Just pay attention to that parts when I talk about them. How does the context of post-World War II Europe shape Arendt's thoughts on totalitarianism? And there's a couple of statements: anti-Semitism as a political and not just a social issue, the role of the Dreyfus affair and its significance in modern European politics, Arendt's critique of the nation-state system and the statelessness problem. I'm not sure if I made a slide on Dreyfus affair, and that is very important for Hannah Arendt's arguments on about anti-Semitism. Dreyfus affair is what happened to the Jewish officer in France. Actually, he was blamed or accused of leaking certain political documents or important documents to Germans, and then he was punished for that. However, that all these documents were formed to put him into this trouble and punishing them. When the truth came out, instead of bringing that truth to the light, they were just kind of hiding. The other person was responsible for that, not this Jewish guy, and they tried to cover that up. And this was so important for Hannah Arendt, showing how anti-Semitism really was happening in society. In the critical race theory, sometimes we say, like, we have to have, sometimes is the wrong word. In the critical race theory, we believe that having neutral lens is not enough to see racial discrimination in society. So you have to have this critical lens to see this stuff. And that's what she's doing here. She's using this critical race analysis or critical race lens to pay attention to this Dreyfus affair, to notice anti-Semitism in this act of blaming Jewish officer for something he never done, and punishing and not being afraid of punishing innocent person. On the other hand, here is other person, the French guy, is covered up to keep the reputation. So he is not blamed or accused of the leaking the document to Germans. It's just kind of warped kind of view. That's what is very important for Hannah Arendt here. So let's dig into it. I start with one of the comments from Hannah Arendt in page 138. I believe this is the one, I think it's a 74 publishing. Power became the essence of political action in the center of political thought when it was separated from political community, which it should serve. So this is a very important quote. So she's talking about power, and the power and violence for Hannah Arendt is two different things, and they are against one another. For Hannah Arendt, power is maintaining solidarity between people, and the violence is when you don't have the power, you have to use violence to maintain control over them. So power and violence is never the same. They are kind of one. If one exists, another one does not exist in society. Here she's talking about power became an essence of political action in the center of political thought when it was separated from the political community which it should serve. So political community, that all these people, the power should serve them, unite them, bring them together, do good things for them. Power became a sense of political action in Europe when it was separated from the people it should serve. So she also making an argument about Jewish people having nothing to do with that situation, the creation of the totalitarian regime in Germany. Jewry was not the operative factor in the Holocaust, but merely a convenient proxy. Totalitarianism was about terror and consistency, not erasing Jewish only. So her argument is Jewish was just a convenient proxy because of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism existed in society for a long time. If you review the history of anti-Semitism in the world, you can see different kinds of actions were taking place, that Jewish people were pushed out of the countries, or they were subject to violence in society, or all different kinds of anti-Semitic actions in society. That's why Hannah Arendt's arguing that they have nothing to do with this, but they were merely a convenient proxy that was easy to use this ideology to create this totalitarian control in society. Then there are some other points here that she says anti-Semitism was important as it provided ideology. So sometimes to move with a political agenda, governments use ideologies to provide justification for their political plan, right? So for Hannah Arendt, anti-Semitism was important as it provided ideology. All these existing justifications of anti-Semitism, why Jewish people are not good, or why they are against this thriving white German nationalism, all of them was used as an ideology to create this nonsense in society. She says the Jewish were hated because they were the money lenders for nobility during feudalism. So Jewish people were mostly known for being money lenders, and they were the bank owners. They were very intellectual people, and she claims that she argues that they were on their way to political leadership, and that's what they were hated. They didn't want them to give political leadership. They are already wealthy nation, right? Jewish acceptance as a group versus individual level. She talks about Jewish were fine in the individual level. People were good friends with Jewish people. People were good neighbors. They had internation marriages, for example. All those kind of stuff was happening. They were having celebrations together, traditions together. They were visiting one another. They were being good friends. However, in the group level or in the ethnic identity level, Jewish people were not accepted. So there is a kind of paradox between why people were accepted as individuals, which is the main part of element of a group, but they are not accepted as a group. Her argument is that actually this, whatever you are coming up with, this anti-Semitism or whatever it is false, because in the individual level, that's where the human beings are accepted by society. And somehow in the group level, they are hated because of the creation of false narratives around Jewish people. So she says the social resentment of the lower middle classes against the Jewish turned it into a highly explosive political element because this bitterly hated Jewish were thought to be well on their way to political power. Some of the quotes from her book I brought up to make you taste the wording, have some taste of her writing in the book. So it's just that she very nicely puts in this quote here: the social resentment of the lower middle classes. She's talking about lower middle classes hating Jewish people against the Jewish turned it into a highly explosive political element because this bitterly hated Jewish were thought to be well on their way to political power. So she also says the Jewish became a well-defined, self-preserving group within one of the classes, the aristocracy or the bourgeoisie. So they are money owners, they are the owners of the production. So therefore they are viewed as bourgeoisie. There is no doubt that the nation state's interest in preserving the Jewish as a special group and preventing their assimilation into class society coincided with the Jewish interests in self-preservation and group survival. Again, there you have to pay attention to the language she is using. She is like, the society wanted to integrate them or assimilate them in the mainstream society. However, Jewish people, they already have their identity. They wanted to preserve their group identity, preserve their group survival, preserve their self-interests. So there is a process of assimilation. The mainstream society wants them to assimilate, but there is the resistance towards it because Jewish people are known for being intellectuals and wealth owners. Now they want to preserve their Jewish identity because they are well-defined group already. So there's like a clash of interests between the mainstream society and Jewish people. So that is that's what she writes. Some of the arguments from her, the part that is anti-Semitism. And then she writes about imperialism and the expansion of power. Arendt in this part discusses the imperialism and the link between racism and nationalism. Now you can, when you think about Holocaust and what happened at the time, probably many of you aware of many of the discussions around this topic. You know already the link between racism and nationalism. We will check what Hannah Arendt says about them. The concept of the mob and its significance in imperial politics, and she also talks about the role of bureaucracy in imperialist expansion in this part of the book. So there's a question: how did imperialism lay the groundwork for totalitarian regimes? Now, first we talked about how anti-Semitism laid the groundwork by creating these racial groups and why Jewish people were hated, and not in the individual level, but in the group level. They were on their way to politics. Those are the main arguments for anti-Semitism. Now she's giving us the second why, or the cause of totalitarianism, as being imperialism. It laid the groundwork for totalitarian regimes. What is the relationship between race thinking and imperialism, according to Arendt? Some questions to think as we go through this process. And this is one of the things she starts the imperialism with. She says, Hobbes laid ground for imperialism. What did Hobbes do? Hobbes was writing about social contract, and Hobbes said, there is a monster in the sea. So the monster has, eyes all over him. And then that can attack people, right? So for the governments to secure people or protect them, this Leviathan, the sea monster, they have to give their rights to the government. So when they give the rights to the government, they basically give their natural rights. So the natural rights, our understanding of natural rights is whoever the strongest can win, right? So we can kill our neighbor and get their widescreen TV, or stronger men can kill the other men and own their woman, for example. So stronger wins. That is the basically very basic way of understanding our natural our natural power or natural right. Also, we can think of that natural right is, for example, if somebody upsets you, you can do anything. And there's no laws and regulations that prevents the other person from being threatened or killed or anything. So that is natural right. So Hobbes is saying like people need to give their rights to the government. The government has to set these laws and regulations in society so nobody kills nobody. By giving your right to kill somebody, you're preserving your safety that nobody else kills you. If that's the case, the government will take care of it. So this is just kind of giving too much power to the government. Everybody is giving their rights to the government, so trusting that government does the right thing. So that's why Hannah Arendt saying that the Hobbes, John Hobbes laid groundwork for imperialism, and then her argument is trusting to the government too much is not the right thing to do. Then she talks about the decline of nation state at the end of rights of men. Now she's talking about people losing their rights. She says, power requires a justification to kill other men. Now, because we give all of our rights to the government, now government needs justification to kill part of this society. Totalitarianism, she says, infinite expansion of ideology and power. So there is all different kinds of political governments in the world. The totalitarianism is one of the political rulings or governments. It has infinite expansion of ideology and power. That pan movements like a German nationalist movement, for example, or in Russia, there is the Bolshevik movement, or all of those pan movements helped the governments to create this totalitarian regime by expanding their ideology and power. Implementation of mass terror by educated, intelligent, and advanced people. So the problem Hannah Arendt is having here is those who created this political system wasn't dumb people. They weren't the ones who are not educated or doesn't know what they are talking about. Her problem is all these intellectual people in the government or political elite come up with this system and created totalitarian control. And she also argues that totalitarian control is like a bicycle. Once you're riding the bicycle, you have to keep riding them. Otherwise, as soon as you stop, you will fall. So totalitarian governments, when they started, it's impossible to stop them. She says imperialism must be considered the first stage in political rule of the bourgeoisie rather than the last stage of capitalism. Now, when we're talking about imperialism, we're talking about after the industrialization in Europe, there was very rich bourgeoisie was shaping in Europe. So these people became powerful in a sense that they had enough money to now expand outside of Europe. And they needed three things. That the main thing they needed was raw materials or resources. They needed the cheap labor or free labor. And the third thing they needed was markets. So they had to sell this surplus produced goods to the markets of these people. And when they started this colonialism, they went to that countries, take their resources, and used people for cheap or free labor, and also exploited their markets. To do that, they had to use racism as a main tool for political purposes. The racism was intentionally created, make those people inferior, so they have to allow this European bourgeois to do what they wanted to do in these colonial states. And the rules and regulations, laws created in Europe at that time, allowed them to do these things. This is the first stage of globalization and also imperialism. That's why she's saying imperialism must be considered the first stage in political rule of the bourgeoisie rather than the last stage of capitalism. So the bourgeoisie, the money owners, had a good connections in the governments, and this is the first time governments allowed them political rule is allowed them to do all this kind of expansionist movements, which she is calling imperialism. So imperialism is essential to capitalism. If you pay attention, like as I explained in the industrialization, all these people, for the first time in the human history, people were many people, thousands of people, millions of people left without job because of the changing environment in the feudalism. People were, the lands were taken away, and the landowners were going and building their manufacturing companies, and now they were without job. Now the men were moving to cities to get a job, right? And then women were left behind. And there's all these different kinds of situations we can discuss. However, our focus here is how imperialism is essential to capitalism. So at one point, Europe is maximized the resources, the raw materials and the labor force, how many people were involved, and also markets. How many glasses do you need? If you met 1,000 glasses and Europe needs only 100, you have 900 extra glasses. And other places, people still don't know how to make these glasses. This is just an example. Or let's say the computer mouse, right? And now you need to go and make more, get advantage of cheap labor or free labor, and also you need to sell this stuff, become rich. So rise of bourgeoisie and the accumulation of power was the steps that's taken towards imperialism. People were allowed this, that the laws allowed them. Also, they provided armies, military guys to go and get these places, colonize these places, maybe kill indigenous people, maybe kill the people who live, native people in that lands. So political theory of expansion, for Hannah Arendt's political theory of expansion, is the political emancipation of bourgeoisie. So she says that we can put in two ways: the political theory of expansion or imperialism is the political emancipation, having a lot of political freedom for those bourgeoisie. They had the right to go and expand and take over other countries or colonize other countries, which involved with a lot of bloodshed and violence in the world, right? Having that freedom, having that power was just a start of imperialism. That was how she explains the political theory of expansion. And the second part of the arguments in imperialism is the race and bureaucracy. And she talks about, and many of you know, as we already discussed this, that European colonizers went to other countries, and then race was used tool and as a consequence for colonizing other countries, other places. And having that power and having this support from one of the advanced continents in the world allowed these people to go other states and take advantage of these people, their resources, their markets, and everything they can. So to maintain, number one, maintaining power and getting wealthy, and then expanding endlessly. And in this, until then, race wasn't the biggest thing. And during this political movement, expansionist movement, the race was created. If it was biological, that there is different colors of skin in, skin of humanity, which is continuum from light to dark. There was now the different colors of skin was attached to different descriptions. There was all this biological and psychological, all different kinds of explanation or justifications of scientific racism. So she's talking about that as race becoming an ideology, that this race is lower class, they can be exploited. The darker color races were placed in between humans and animals. Therefore, they are okay to be manslaughtered or using violence against them, using them as a labor, like we use other animals for labor, like donkeys or horses or other animals for labor, sell them or buy them or all of those stuff. This was justification for slavery. This was justification for expansionist movement, and this was justification for imperialism. And in the process, Arendt argues that there was the creation of master race, the races above all these other races. So this race has to be the dominant race. They could therefore make decisions over other humans. Like if you have full farm of chickens, for example, and you are the owner, the dominant figure in this chicken farm, you have the decision-making power over these chickens. If you want to use them as a meat, you can take 100 of them and use them as a meat, or you can keep them for getting some, let's say, the eggs or other things, right? So master race was a dominant race, and other races were treated as way lower than they are, and which is so wrong. And then it's just so hard to understand how people manage to justify this kind of ideologies in society. And she talks about Jewish people being the savages in our modern times. Like there was different kind of ideology attached to Jewish people and Judaism. It's not really about Judaism. It's not about Judaism. It's not about their skin color, because Jewish people are not necessarily dark-skinned people. It's not about their look, but it is about being Jewish, and that being Jewish is somehow a race, and then they are savages of the time. It's a very complex argument, and she's trying to understand what was going on in society. She says money could finally beget money because power, with complete disregards for all laws, economic as well as ethical, could appropriate wealth. She's main point is that it was about wealth. It was about the drive behind this all was like getting wealthy and how to appropriate wealth owned by other people. There's only way to do that. Either you have to justify why you're taking them, or that justification may involve making them feel less than a human. So then you can take their stuff, or that justification have to make a dominant group that they have the ability or capacity to take this everything they wanted from the other nations. There's two parts to this comment I wanted to read independently. She says, race, in other words, was an escape into an irresponsibility where nothing human could any longer exist. So basically, her argument is, as we already mentioned, race is the justification to make people to feel or make people to look they are less than a human. They are nothing human can exist about them. So they are enslaving them, killing them, taking away anything they want from these people, so they should not have the element of being a human. And she says, and bureaucracy was the result of a responsibility that no man can bear for his fellow man, and no people for another people. Her writing is very dense, and she's talking about the bureaucracy was the result of a responsibility. So if there was a responsibility towards giving some rights to human beings, now that irresponsibility, just giving no right to human beings, just so bureaucracy was changed from one thing to another. She's talking about the laws being changed, so people don't have the responsibility anymore. For example, it brings to my mind that one of the laws to own this or kind of take certain land was this land should not have its own people. So you can take the land, that was European law, but it should not have their own people. So what people did, they came and killed people. They tried very hard to assimilate them to their culture. So they are not indigenous people anymore. They're one of the Europeans. There was all kinds of stuff is done to show that there's no people. There are no existence of this indigenous people in this land, allowed them to take the land. So Arendt's definition of totalitarianism. So what is totalitarianism? For Arendt, totalitarianism is a noble form of government. That is one of the definitions she gives that never existed and never would again exist probably. So she says, to be a totalitarian regime, it has to have the elements of ideology, terror, and mass manipulation. Mass manipulation in the level that people have no individual rights. They become atomized individuals. They're scared or fearing everything. That they then don't trust their very close people. Like they don't trust their neighbor. They don't trust their brothers and sisters, because if they trust, those people are already fearing the government. They might say whatever in between them to the government. So everybody lost their trust to one another, and social bonds were dismantled or broken, that people cannot get together for religious purposes or any other purposes. The main idea was that if people have any kind of social bond, religion, tradition, or anything, they can resist totalitarian regime. They can resist this terror ideology and manipulation. So this is what the difference between traditional forms of dictatorship and the totalitarian government. In the traditional forms of dictatorship, there's a dictator telling everything for society, but this ideology, terror, and mass manipulation in some way is not in the same level of the totalitarian regime. People have some social bonds, some trust, and they might have formed some certain kind of religious or other kind of traditional things. For to be totalitarian control, people have to lose all of them. They can only trust themselves. That's the main thing is about totalitarianism. There is no definition of totalitarianism in this book, and these are the elements you can understand totalitarianism. Propaganda, the role of propaganda in creating alternative reality. So in both in Nazi Germany and Stalinism, the propaganda was the main tool of totalitarian regime. Everything was the political group controlled all different kinds of information. There was only information available what the government wants to share. No other kind of information was available. Therefore, all the information is a propaganda for the, making Hitler the best, charismatic, amazing leader, making this their political agenda as the best agenda ever, and giving all these justifications, giving reasons for whatever being done in society, giving no voice to certain groups, in this case, not giving no voice to Jewish people. This has been done step by step, starting certain time. First, people could not use the same stores as the other people used. The Jewish people could not use the stores. They could not allow it to practice law. They could not allow it to teach at the universities. Then the second level was they did not allow it to send their children to universities, that all Jewish people were expelled from universities. Then they could not use any lawyers from anywhere. Now, you don't have Jewish lawyers anymore because they were first let go. Now you cannot use other nation like a German lawyers if you have something. So if you have a problem, nobody will listen to you. If you have an issue with anything, if you want to make a complaint, if you want to do something, you cannot do it. Only one thing you can do if you manage, you have to leave the country. So that's all you can do. There's no trust, there is no support, there is no voice in society, and there is the state manufactured propaganda all everywhere, and that's the only thing people hear. Mass movements and their relationship to totalitarian regimes. In this case, pan-nationalist movements in both cases in Germany and Stalinism was the main thing, that they had a very tight relationship with the totalitarian regime. They actually provided ideology, provided motivation, provided propaganda, provided all these narratives to allow or enable the governments to do totalitarian control. How totalitarianism manipulates truth and history. As we said, everything was about the creation of all different kinds of information, making other groups voiceless. So there was only one part of the society is making history and then making the truth. That is the dominant group. That is the dominant group creating everything, controlling everything, propagating in the country, and that, making this country under surveillance, under totalitarian control. One of the most powerful tools totalitarian leaders use when they're selling their ideology is propaganda, as it fills the void of failed democracy. Before filling you with propaganda, they will take away your purpose, identity, and meaning to help make you susceptible. So she's saying here that the propaganda now it replaced democracy. Now, democracy, the ideology, the society always needs ideology. Before they filled society with propaganda, they already, the identity of this people and the purpose in life and the social bonds were taken away from them, or social bonds were chopped. They were isolated, atomized people. They had nothing to do. Now they need some purpose to live for. Therefore, now the government created propaganda fed to these people to give them some purpose. People who lived in that situation, in that episode, in that condition, they could give their lives for this cause. They could do anything to serve the Nazi Germany. They could do anything to make Hitler's ideology and plan to work. Why? Because their purpose was gone, their identity was gone, nothing left. They left with this false ideology and they left with this false propaganda, and that's why they acted on it. That's why they had nothing else but only this thing, and then they could give their life for it. It's just a very powerful statement. She says totalitarian movements are mass organizations of atomized, isolated individuals, atomized and isolated individuals. So now you need to understand that the totalitarian movements are not the movements that done by the, or this is the wrong way. Totalitarian movements are not consists of all these people in the government. All people in that society made the members or the people in this totalitarian movement by taking away their identity, taking away social bonds, taking away everything from them, and making them atomized and isolated individuals and feeding them propaganda. When people have nothing left, all they have is fear and anxiety in society, and only thing given to them is this propaganda, they can give their lives for that propaganda. So that's what she's talking about. These people, German people, who were innocent in the beginning, they had nothing to do with this ideology and propaganda, now became part of this totalitarian movement. And all the soldiers were hired from these people, and they just helped the Nazi army or Hitler to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish. So in End of Rights of Man, and she makes some of the elements more crispy or clear. She talks about loneliness. In society, she says everybody is lonely. Loneliness is the ideal weapon used to help assure in totalitarian state. People don't have nobody because social bonds are gone. and people don't trust one another. Therefore, they're very lonely. So she's asking, what would lonely people do? So lonely people with fear and anxiety, and lonely people with fed by this propaganda and ideology, what would they do? They will give their lives for this ideology and the propaganda. So structureless masses, selflessness. And she's just continuing to develop on the idea of why people are willing to give their lives for Nazi party or their plan to create this master whatever, because they don't have nothing left to them. Only one thing they have is this ideology and nothing else. They become selfless. They can do anything for that cause because they lost everything else. Only thing they have is this um, the fear and also totalitarian ideology. Erosion of social relationships and totalitarian leaders. Totalitarian leaders are portrayed as charismatic, as motivator, and then come across like just have it all. But they are the ones just work restlessly on eroding social relationships and social bonds in society and creating fictional reality. Um, and then she goes into how totalitarian regimes organize masses, and she talks about totalitarian leaders will make you unemployed, make you angry, isolated, and disengaged in an extreme mental state before giving you something to believe to the government or ideology and state. So that's what they did. They were unemployed first. People could not, the Jewish people couldn't work. They couldn't go to universities. They couldn't hire a lawyer. They couldn't use certain stores. And then they created such an situation that people have nothing else left. Totalitarian states will dehumanize you by taking away your spontaneity in decision making and freedoms. That there was a violence, and violence was random and abstract, that people just could be taken away. For example, in the Stalinism, there was a something they called the car. Overnight, that car would come and take away people. So nobody knows why, and nobody knows who is the next person. Everybody sleeps with fears. In the middle of the night, this car comes and takes people from that community. And that kind of actions makes people be scared of that. The fear is part of this violence. So violence is done in society. It is spontaneous, and it's just done, or they can shoot anybody on spot, and people are now scared. They are just in fear, and they do anything the government asks from them to do. And the third one is casual use of violence will be used to scare you into adhering to the ideology. And it's the same thing what I'm talking about. For example, for no specific reason or no enough reason, somebody can be killed in spot, or people can be taken away from them. That is the casual use of violence. So it's done enough so people can't do nothing about it. They can just fear for their lives and try to spy on the neighbor or even their close, beloved people, to make sure they are safe, that everybody's personal safety comes, or security comes number one. Nobody wants to, give up their lives or get killed in society. So therefore, they're controllable now, and anybody can do anything to make sure they are not the next one picked up by the authorities. Consistent violence desensitize the aggressor and victim, making it more likely to continue. So that's another. She says, selflessness in the sense that oneself does not matter. The feeling of being expendable was no longer the expression of individual idealism, but a mass phenomena. So she's talking about being people being ready to giving their lives. She's saying that, expression of expendable, just being like you understand what's expensing something, right? Expendable, being expendable was no longer expression of individual idealism. It wasn't only in theory anymore. It was mass phenomena. So anybody in this mass society can give their lives for this ideology, give their lives for these authorities. Just somebody needs to ask them, like, your life is, we need your life to whatever, and then people would give their lives. The chief value, however, of the secret or conspiracy society's organizational structure and moral standards for purposes of mass organization, in their unsurpassed capacity to establish and safeguard the fictitious world through consistent lying. And this is again about propaganda. This comments probably will help you how it's really written in the book. Like, I can explain to you, but reading parts of it really helps you to get the taste of the writing. So there are some questions here. How does Arendt connect the breakdown of the private-public distinction to the rise of totalitarianism? There was nothing private in totalitarianism. Everything was watched, surveilled, and everything was controlled in society. What warnings that Arendt provide about the future of democratic societies? Basically, Hannah Arendt says this can start in any country if you are not aware of what's going on. She gives some of the recommendations. She says, if you are unsure of if this is the right thing to do, you need to ask yourself that, can you live with this, what you have done? Knowing what you have done, can you live with yourself? Always checking with your, she continues that in the social condition that I don't remember the book. So she continues this idea of why people did what they did and how we could prevent this happening, and people don't do what other people asks them to do if that's against their beliefs. For example, killing somebody is wrong. Even whoever tells you to kill that person, that's wrong. Even your job is killing that people. If you see massively innocent people are being killed, you have to ask yourself that, can you live with this? So this kind of stuff she talks about when she provides some suggestions for the future of democratic societies. Can Arendt's analysis of totalitarianism help us to understand current global trends? And I expanded on this in the beginning. Certainly, there are so many analysis of totalitarianism done by Arendt is applicable in different situations in our global trends today. What lessons can be drawn for preserving democratic institutions? As we already explained, that there's always, we need to make sure that if there is a propaganda, if there is a social isolation, if there is social bonds being broken by the governments, those are very troubling kind of warnings for society. And also, like, if there's a control of media, for example, if people are being voiceless, that their voices are taken away from them, or certain groups are there are narratives against certain groups, that they are less than human, or they somehow fall into this racial category, that people need to be aware of that kind of situations. So if we need to take one thing from this lecture, that would be the quote from Arendt. She says, "The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the dedicated communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists." So for her, if you don't know the distinction between fact and fiction through this propaganda, or you don't know the distinction between true and false, that is the disaster in society. That is the main elements of totalitarian regime. So this is our very important lecture for this week. And thank you for listening to this. And I think you will have some sense of reading this huge book by Hannah Arendt if you're listening to this. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be very happy to help you. Bye-bye.